You're listening to Plane Crash, the book by Michael Diamond as retold to the kids of the Watertown SDA Church Junior Sabbath School. This is a story of one man's survival and God's faithful, miraculous rescuing power. Let's go. Chapter 12. Mike felt adrift as though he were in the middle of an ocean. The Saturday morning sun inched over the mountains. Mike did not feel the cold. Time didn't register. How many days has it been, he wondered. 3 days? 4? Maybe 6? What kind of bird is that? Mike stared at the huge, unfamiliar bird circling above him. Mike had crashed in the Sisquoc Condor Bird Sanctuary area. Condors are vultures. Mike closed his eyes. He heard the wind moving the tree branches above him, casting their shadows upon his face. He felt no pain and just numbness. He was vaguely aware that he was passing in and out of consciousness. If I'm not rescued today, I don't think I'll make it. The realization did not bother him. Suddenly he was aware of a new, faraway sound. Voices? He wondered. He opened his eyes. Help! He called, but he heard nothing more. I must be imagining things. He was disappointed. In the valley below, Wally thought he heard something. Wait! He held up his hand. You hear something? No, the other said. Did you? Be quiet. I thought I heard someone. But there was only the sound of the wind. I guess not, Wally said, disappointed. They resumed their conversation. Now Mike heard them again. It is voices. Help! He called out again. We heard it this time, the other said. Then Mike saw them in the valley far below. He was surprised. Boy, they look small, he marveled. I'm not as close to the bottom of this canyon as I thought. They must be hundreds of feet below me. Mike breathed deeply. Help! He called again. Where are you? They called back. Up here, Mike answered. Mike's answer echoed through the canyon and bounced off the walls. He saw their heads moving back and forth, trying to determine where his voice was coming from, but they didn't see him. Meanwhile, Beaver 32, the rescue helicopter, was flying in. Again they called out, but Mike could barely hear them now. The helicopter noise drowned out their voices. Bruce, Joe called into his remote radio. We think we hear a survivor. Really? Bruce turned to Lou. You hear that? Fantastic, she said. But Bruce, Joe continued, we can't hear him with a chopper here. Tell Beaver 32 to back off. We're trying to establish verbal communication with a downed pilot. Once the chopper was back out of the area, the ground crew called to Mike again. Are you in the plane? No, Mike answered. I'm up here. The effort to yell was too great. Mike blacked out. Can you hear us? They shouted, but all they heard were their own echoes. We lost contact, Wally said. Let's head up to the plane. Not up this wall, another said, looking up hundreds of feet. Wally agreed. How about the ridge next to the canyon? We can try it single file. Rocks scrambled and clouds of dust puffed around them at each step. They called every now and again to Mike. Sometimes he answered, sometimes he didn't. Finally, they reached the plane. To their surprise, Mike wasn't in it. Where is he? They puzzled. They searched the immediate area around the plane. Mike! Where are you? They called. Down here, he answered weakly. He's below us, Joe exclaimed. How did he get down there? He must have fallen over these cliffs. Well, we better not go down that way ourselves, Ed responded. We could fall. Plus we would knock rocks down on him. You're right, Wally said. So the trio went around by another route to get to Mike. Rocks slipped out from under their feet as they worked themselves down around the cliffs. Mike opened his eyes when he heard them getting closer. Did you fall off those cliffs? They asked when they reached him, pointing up the 300 feet toward the plane. Yeah, Mike mumbled, by now not sure whether he had or not. Then his eyes opened wider and fastened on a canteen on the hip of one of the rescuers. Water, he pleaded. It had been 48 hours since he'd had any. We can't give you water, was the answer. You might have internal injuries. Water could damage you further. But I can do this. He unscrewed his canteen and poured the water onto a handkerchief. Here, you can suck on this. Come over here a minute. Joe motioned the crew away from Mike. We have a problem, Joe told the others. Mike is in no condition to use the jungle penetrator that the chopper's carrying. Why? Wally asked. He'd have to sit on a folded-out chair and hang onto the cable while being pulled up. He's in no condition to do that. Could we carry him to an area where the copter could pick him up directly? Wally asked. There's no open place around here, Joe said, looking at the steep cliffs all around them. What do we do? Joe picked up his radio. Looks like the only way we're going to get Chambers out of here is with a Stokes litter. We also need a doctor. Roger, McCourt responded to the request above the noise of the helicopter engine. We'll fly to Santa Barbara to pick up the litter. Tell Goleta Hospital to have a doctor away to the airport for us. Also, McCord continued, if we're going into that canyon for a pickup, we'll need to clear the area of brush. Once the ground team got the message, they started clearing the area, chopping down the tree that had stopped Mike. Dr. John Dorman, a Navy flight surgeon on reserve, was on duty in the emergency room when the call came. He was used to this. He had been stationed in Vietnam, where he had flown many missions with the Sea Air Rescue Unit from the USS aircraft carrier Yorktown. Dr. Dorman dressed in flight gear and was on wait at the airport when the Huey landed. Sergeant House, McCord instructed a non-com, rig the litter to the hoist. We'll get out of here once Dorman is aboard. As House attached the Stokes litter to the cable, Dr. Dorman jumped aboard and they took off. Miles and House filled the litter with splints and blankets as they flew up through the mountains. I see the plane, McCord called as they approached the crash site. He maneuvered the helicopter into the box canyon to a spot far below the Cessna 150. Carefully, he nosed the chopper into the corner where Chambers and the ground crew waited. Boy, it's tight in here, McCord the pilot worried. Dowd nodded. Yeah, I hope the blades don't clip the walls. Okay, now, McCord shouted. Miles and House shoved the loaded litter out the door and lowered it to the cleared area below. McCord struggled to steady the chopper against the buffeting gusts of wind. On the ground, Joe grabbed one end of the litter. Get the other end, he shouted to Ed and Wally above the noise of the Huey. They wrestled the litter to the ground and disconnected the cable. Let's get out of here. Hands clenched tightly on the controls, McCord lifted the Beaver 32 chopper out of the canyon and away from the gusty winds. That was close, exclaimed McCord to Dowd. Yeah, Dowd shouted back. Those blades couldn't have been more than 6 feet away from the walls. And the wind, did you see the Cessna rocking back and forth? I sure did, McCord answered. Looked as if the plane could work itself off that little shelf and just crash down on top of us. Dowd was worried. Maybe the fellas down there could make an overland carry to a safer pickup spot. That's a good idea, McCord responded. I'll notify Salinas. Base camp to ground crew, Lou said on the radio. Salinas says Beaver 32 wants you to carry Chambers out. Why? Joe asked. The other two tore marker panels into strips to tie splints to Chambers' broken limbs. The chopper's blades came too close to the side of the cliff. Also, they're worried about Mike's plane. It doesn't look too stable. It might fall. Okay, Lou, we'll discuss it. The three looked around. I still don't see any good spot close by. Wally remarked, if we have to take him down to the valley, we're going to need more help. I don't know, Joe said, shaking his head as he looked at Mike. I don't think he'll survive an overland carry. I agree, Wally responded. And to get more help up here and get him down to a safe pickup, we're talking at least 12 more hours. The helicopter can't even land at base camp. If Beaver 32 doesn't do it, I'm afraid Chambers will be a goner. Lord, Joe prayed silently, please help. He slipped his radio off of his belt. Base camp? Go ahead, Lou answered. We don't think Chambers can survive an overland carry. He needs medical attention now. Okay, Joe, we'll inform the pilot, see what he decides. Stand by. What do you think? Pilot McCord asked Dowd. A man's life hung in the balance, but maybe other lives too. It was a heavy decision. Let's go for it, Dowd answered. Okay, Salinas, we'll do it. Have the ground crew get ready. We're coming in. Great, shouted the ground crew when they heard of the decision. Thank you, Lord, Joe said as he prepared Mike for extraction. Let's get Chambers onto the stretcher, Joe said to the others, but first they had to apply splints. So they wouldn't have to move Mike unnecessarily, they dug tunnels under him to pass the ties through. Rocks tumbled from underfoot, then rolled to the ledge 20 feet away and dropped 300 feet. The men heard the echoes of falling rocks reverberating through the canyon. Once the splints were securely fastened, the men rolled a green military blanket lengthwise. They moved Mike on his side, placed the rolled-up blanket against his back, and laid him down again. A little more tunneling along his other side, and the blanket was pulled through. Then one man held the litter at a 45-degree angle next to Mike, while the other two lifted him slightly with the blanket and eased him onto the litter. Okay, Joe said, now we tie him in and pad his head with blankets. That done, they carried him a short distance to the clearing and radioed for the chopper to return. As the three checked Mike, they heard the chopper coming. Here we go again, McCord said, taking a deep breath. He edged the chopper into the corner of the canyon, closer and closer, fighting the buffeting winds created by his own rotor blades. Look at the Cessna rocking, Dowd exclaimed as the chopper passed on in its descent to Mike and the ground crew. Dust and dirt flew. The way the winds are rocking that plane, he left his thought unspoken, but visions of a big fireball filled his imagination. Doesn't look good, McCord agreed. Drops of sweat broke out on his face. They descended to 50 feet above the clearing. Okay, Miles, McCord shouted into the intercom. Lower the hoist. Yes, sir, Miles said, pressing the switch to start the cable down. House and Dorman kept a close watch on the rotor blades as they spun just 5 feet away from the stone wall. Mike opened his eyes and saw the huge chopper hovering above him. As he felt the winds blowing down hard on his face, he closed his eyes. Feels like I'm going to be blown right off this cliff, Mike thought. Miles knelt on one knee in the chopper, his left hand on the hoist cable. The trio below grabbed the hook at the end of the cable and attached it to the smaller cables from the stretcher. Then they stood back as Beaver 32 lifted the litter with Mike in it. At first, the litter hung steadily, but as the wash from the rotor buffeted it, the litter started to swing. The higher the litter was raised, the wilder it swung in ever-widening circles. The careening litter threw off the helicopter center of balance, and the chopper blades tilted dangerously close to the canyon wall. Miles dropped the hoist controls and lay on the chopper floor. He reached outside and grabbed the cable with both hands in an attempt to stop the swinging. House took over the hoist controls, winching Mike up as fast as possible. Looks like we're going to buy the farm, Dorman thought, as the blades edged closer and closer to the canyon wall with each swing of the litter. Of the hundreds of chopper flights he'd survived in Vietnam, none had brought him so close to death. The chopper dove toward the cliffs, then backed off at each swing. No maneuvering on the part of the crew seemed to help. Unwelcome thoughts of dropping Mike flashed through their minds. All of them, plus Mike and the men on the ground, could be killed if those blades hit the wall. The hoist cable was equipped with an explosive device that could instantly sever the cable in an emergency. Why doesn't McCourt arm the device? Dorman wondered. At that moment, almost as if he could read Dorman's thoughts, McCourt armed the device. Dorman was relieved. From Bluff Camp, Bruce and Lou watched through their binoculars and prayed. You've been listening to Plane Crash by Michael Diamond. If you're enjoying the story so far, tune in for the next chapter. And meanwhile, you can visit my YouTube channel where you'll find stories like these, Bible stories, mission stories, as well as Bible and history skits for kids and adults. See you next time.